Beelzebub's Tales to His Grandson, Chapter 2, pages 51 through 54. Introduction. Why Beelzebub was in our solar system. It was in the year 223 after the creation of the world by objective time calculation, or as it would be said here on earth, in the year 1921 after the birth of Christ. Through the universe flew the ship Karnak of the Trans-Space Communication. It was flying from spaces Asu Paratsata, that is, from the spaces of the Milky Way, from the planet Karatas to the solar system Pandetsnoch, the sun of which is also called the Pole Star. On the said trans-space ship was Beelzebub and his kinsmen and near attendants. He was on his way to the planet Revosvradendra, to a special conference in which he had consented to take part at the request of his friends of long standing. Only the remembrance of these old friendships had constrained him to accept this invitation, since he was no longer young. And so lengthy a journey and the vicissitudes inseparable from it were by no means an easy task for one of his years. Only a little before this journey, Beelzebub had returned home to the planet Karatas, where he had received his arising, and far from which, on account of circumstances independent of his own essence, he had passed many years of his existence in conditions not proper to his nature. This many-yeared existence, unsuited to him, together with the perceptions unusual for his nature and the experiences not proper to his essence involved in it, had not failed to leave on his common presence a perceptible mark. Besides, time itself had by now inevitably aged him, and the said unusual conditions of existence had brought Beelzebub, just that Beelzebub who had had such an exceptionally strong, fiery, and splendid youth, to an also exceptional old age. Long, long before, while Beelzebub was still existing at home on the planet Karatas, he had been taken, owing to his extraordinarily resourceful intelligence, into the service on the Sun Absolute, where our Lord's sovereign endlessness has the fundamental place of his dwelling. And there, Beelzebub, among others like himself, had become an attendant upon his endlessness. It was just then that, owing to the as yet unformed reason due to his youth, and owing to his callow and therefore still impetuous mentation with unequally flowing association, that is, owing to a mentation based, as is natural to beings who have not yet become definitely responsible, on a limited understanding, Beelzebub once saw in the government of the world something which seemed to him illogical, and having found support among his comrades, beings like himself not yet formed, interfered in what was none of his business. Thanks to the impetuosity and force of Beelzebub's nature, his intervention together with his comrades then soon captured all minds, and the effect was to bring the central kingdom of the megalocosmos almost to the edge of revolution. Having learned of this, his endlessness, notwithstanding his all-lovingness and all-forgiveness, was constrained to banish Beelzebub with his comrades to one of the remote corners of the universe, namely, to the solar system Ors, whose inhabitants call it simply the solar system, and to assign as the place of their existence one of the planets of that solar system, namely Mars, with the privilege of existing on other planets also, though only in the same solar system. Among these exiles, beside the said comrades of Beelzebub, were a number of those who merely sympathized with him, and also the attendants and subordinates both of Beelzebub and of his comrades. All, with their households, arrived at this remote place, and there, in a short time on the planet Mars, a whole colony was formed of three-centered beings from various planets of the central part of our great universe. All this population, extraordinary for the said planet, accommodated itself little by little to its new dwelling place, and many of them even found one or another occupation for shortening the long years of their exile. They found occupations either on this same planet Mars or upon the neighboring planet, namely on those planets that had been almost entirely neglected on account of their remoteness from the center and the poverty of all their formations. As the years rolled by, many, either on their own initiative or in response to needs of general character, migrated gradually from the planet Mars to other planets. But Beelzebub himself, together with his near attendants, remained on the planet Mars, where he had organized his existence more or less tolerably. One of his chief occupations was the arranging of an observatory on the planet Mars, for the observation both of remote points of the universe and of the conditions of existence of beings on neighboring planets. And this observatory of his, it may here be remarked, afterwards became well known and even famous everywhere in the universe. Although the solar system ores had been neglected owing to its remoteness from the center and to many other reasons, nevertheless our Lord Sovereign had sent from time to time his messengers to the planets of this system to regulate, more or less, the being existence of the three-brained beings arising on them, for the coordination of the process of their existence with the general world harmony. And thus to a certain planet of this solar system, namely the planet Earth, there was once sent as such a messenger from our endlessness a certain Ashiata Shiyamash. And as Beelzebub had then fulfilled a certain need in connection with his mission, the said messenger, when he returned once more to the Sun Absolute, earnestly besought his endlessness to pardon this once young and fiery but now aged Beelzebub. In view of this request of Ashiata Shiyamash, and also of the modest and cognizant existence of Beelzebub himself, our Maker-Creator pardoned him, and gave him permission to return to the place of his arising. And that is why Beelzebub, after a long absence, happened now to be again in the center of the universe. His influence and authority had not only not declined during his exile, but on the contrary, they had greatly increased, since all those around him were clearly aware that, thanks to his prolonged existence in the aforementioned unusual conditions, his knowledge and experience must inevitably have been broadened and deepened. And so, when events of great importance occurred on one of the planets of the solar system, Pandetsnoch, Beelzebub's old friends had decided to intrude upon him and to invite him to the conference concerning these events. And it was as the outcome of this that Beelzebub was now making the long journey on the ship Karnak from the planet Karatas to the planet Revosvoradendra. On this big spaceship Karnak, the passengers included the kinsmen and attendants of Beelzebub, and also many beings who served on the ship itself. During the period to which this tale of ours refers, all the passengers were occupied either with their duties or simply with the actualization of what is called active mentation. Among all the passengers aboard the ship, one very handsome boy was conspicuous. He was always near Beelzebub himself. This was Hussein, the son of Beelzebub's favorite son, Tuluf. After his return home from exile, Beelzebub had seen this grandson of his, Hussein, for the first time. And appreciating his good heart, and also owing to what is called family attraction, he took an instant liking to him. And as the time happened to coincide with the time when the reason of little Hussein needed to be developed, Beelzebub, having a great deal of free time there, himself undertook the education of his grandson, and from that time on took Hussein everywhere about with him. That is why Hussein also was accompanying Beelzebub on this long journey and was among the number around him. And Hussein, on his side, so loved his grandfather that he would not stir a step without him, and he eagerly absorbed everything his grandfather either said or taught. At the time of this narrative, Beelzebub, with Hussein and his devoted old servant Ahun, who always accompanied him everywhere, were seated on the highest Kaznik, that is, on the upper deck of the ship Karnak, under the Kalnokranonis, somewhat resembling what we should call a large glass bell, and were talking there among themselves while observing the boundless space. Beelzebub was talking about the solar system where he had passed long years, and Beelzebub was just then describing the peculiarities of the nature of the planet called Venus. During this conversation, it was reported to Beelzebub that the captain of their ship wished to speak with him, and to this request Beelzebub acceded. Beelzebub's Tales to His Grandson, Chapter 3. The Cause of the Delay in the Falling of the Ship Karnak. Pages 56 through 59. The captain soon afterwards entered, and having performed before Beelzebub all the ceremonies appropriate to Beelzebub's rank, said, "Your Right Reverence, allow me to ask your authoritative opinion upon an inevitability that lies in the line of our course, and which will hinder our smooth falling by the shortest route. The point is, if we follow our intended course, then our ship, after 2 kilprenos, will pass through the solar system Voinique. But just through where our ship must pass, there must also pass, about a kilpreno before, the great comet belonging to that solar system and named Sakur, or as it is sometimes called, the Madcap. So, if we keep to our proposed route, we must inevitably traverse the space through which this comet will have to pass. Your Right Reverence, of course, knows that this Madcap comet always leaves in its track a great deal of Zilnotrago, which on entering the planetary body of a being disorganizes most of its functions until all the Zilnotrago is volatilized out of it. I thought at first, continued the captain, of avoiding the Zilnotrago by steering the ship around these spheres. But for this, a long detour would be necessary, which would greatly lengthen the time of our passage. On the other hand, to wait somewhere until the Zilnotrago is dispersed would take still longer. In view of the sharp distinction in the alternatives before us, I cannot myself decide what to do, and so I have ventured to trouble you, Your Right Reverence, for your competent advice." The captain having finished speaking, Beelzebub thought a little, and then said as follows, "Really, I do not know how to advise you, my dear captain. Ah, yes. In that solar system where I existed for a long time, there is a planet called Earth. On that planet Earth arose and still continue to arise very strange three-centered beings. And among the beings of a continent of that planet called Asia, there arose and existed a very wise three-brained being whom they called their Mullah Nasruddin. For each and every peculiar situation, great and small, in the existence of the beings there, Beelzebub continued, this same terrestrial sage, Mullah Nasruddin, had an apt and pithy saying. As all the sayings were full of the sense of truth for existence there, I also always used them there as a guide in order to have a comfortable existence among the beings of that planet. And in the given case too, my dear Captain, I intend to profit by one of his wise sayings. In such a situation as has befallen us, he would probably say, "You cannot jump over your knees, and it is absurd to try to kiss your own elbow." I now say the same to you, and I add, there is nothing to be done. When an event is impending which arises from forces immeasurably greater than our own, we must submit. The only question is, which of the alternatives you mentioned should be chosen? That is, to wait somewhere, or to add to our journey by a detour. You say, to make a detour will greatly lengthen our journey, but that waiting will take still longer. Good, my dear Captain. Suppose that by making the detour we should save a little time. What do you think? Is the wear and tear of the parts of our ship's machinery worthwhile for the sake of ending our journey a little sooner? If the detour should involve even the most trifling damage to our ship, then in my opinion we ought to prefer your second suggestion. That is, to stop somewhere until the path is cleared of the noxious Zilno Trago. By that means we should spare our ship useless damage. And we will try to fill the period of the unforeseen delay with something useful for us all. For instance, it would give me personally great pleasure to talk with you about contemporary ships in general and about our ship in particular. Very many new things, of which I still know nothing, have been done in this field during my absence from these parts. For example, in my time, these big trans-space ships were so complicated and cumbersome that it took almost half their power to carry the materials necessary to elaborate their possibility of locomotion. But in their simplicity and the freedom on them, these contemporary ships are just embodiments of bliss tokirno. There is such a simplicity for beings upon them, and such freedom in respect of all being manifestations, that at times you forget that you are not on one of the planets. So, my dear Captain, I should like very much to know how this boon was brought about and how the contemporary ships work. But now, go and make all arrangements necessary for the required stopping. And then, when you are quite free, come to me again, and we will pass the time of our unavoidable delay in conversation useful for us all. When the captain had gone, Hussein suddenly sprang to his feet and began to dance and clap his hands and shout, "Oh, I'm glad of this!" Beelzebub looked with affection on these joyous manifestations of his favorite. But old Ahun could not restrain himself, and shaking his head reproachfully, called the boy, half to himself, a growing egoist. Hearing what Ahun called him, Hussein stopped in front of him, and looking at him mischievously said, "Don't be angry with me, old Ahun. The reason of my joy is not egoism, but only the coincidence which chances to be happy for me. You heard, didn't you? My dear grandfather did not decide only just to make a stop, but he also promised the captain to talk with him. And you know, don't you, that the talks of my dear grandfather always bring out tales of places where he has been? And you know also how delightfully he tells them, and how much new and interesting information becomes crystallized in our presences from these tales? Where's the egoism? Hasn't he himself, of his own free will, having weighed with his wise reason all the circumstances of this unforeseen event, decided to make a stop, which evidently doesn't upset his intended plans very much. It seems to me that my dear grandfather has no need to hurry. Everything necessary for his rest and comfort is present on the Karnak. And here also are many who love him and whom he loves. Don't you remember, he said recently, we must not oppose forces higher than our own, and added that not only one must not oppose them, but even submit and receive all their results with reverence. At the same time, praising and glorifying the wonderful and providential works of our Lord Creator. I am not glad because of the misadventure, but because an unforeseen event issuing from above has occurred, owing to which we shall be able to listen once more to the tales of my dear grandfather. Is it my fault that the circumstances are by chance most desirable and happy for me? No, dear Ahun, not only should you not rebuke me, but you should join me in expressing gratitude to the source of all beneficent results that arise. All this time, Beelzebub listened attentively and with a smile to the chatter of his favorite, and when he had finished, said, "You are right, dear Hussein, and for being right, I will tell you, even before the captain's arrival, anything you like." Upon hearing this, the boy at once ran and sat at the feet of Beelzebub, and after thinking a little said, "My dear grandfather, you have told me so much about the solar system where you spent so many years, that now perhaps I could continue just by logic alone to describe the details of the nature of that peculiar corner of our universe. But I'm curious to know whether there dwell three-brained beings on the planets of that solar system, and whether higher being bodies are coded in them. Please tell me now about just this, dear grandfather," concluded Hussein, looking affectionately up at Beelzebub. "Yes," replied Beelzebub. "On almost all the planets of that solar system also three-brained beings dwell. And in almost all of them, higher being bodies can be coded. Higher being bodies, or as they are called on some planets of that solar system, souls, arise in the three-brained beings breeding on all the planets, except those before reaching which the emanations of our most holy Sun Absolute, owing to repeated deflections, gradually lose the fullness of their strength, and eventually cease entirely to contain the vivific power for coding higher being bodies. Certainly, my boy, on each separate planet of that solar system also, the planetary bodies of the three-brained beings are coded, and take an exterior form in conformity with the nature of the given planet, and are adapted in their details to the surrounding nature. For instance, on that planet on which it was ordained that all we exiles should exist, namely the planet Mars, the three-brained beings are coded with planetary bodies having the form, how shall I tell you, a form like a karuna. That is to say, they have a long, broad trunk, amply provided with fat, and heads with enormous protruding and shining eyes. On the back of this enormous planetary body of theirs are two large wings, and on the underside, two comparatively small feet with very strong claws. Almost the whole strength of this enormous planetary body is adapted by nature to generate energy for their eyes and for their wings. As a result, the three-brained beings breeding on that planet can see freely everywhere, whatever the Kaldezachti, and they can also move, not only over the planet itself, but also in its atmosphere, and some of them occasionally even manage to travel beyond the limits of its atmosphere. The three-brained beings breeding on another planet, a little below the planet Mars, owing to the intense cold there, are covered with thick, soft wool. The external form of these three-centered beings is like that of a tusuk. That is, it resembles a kind of double sphere. The upper sphere serving to contain the principal organs of the whole planetary body, and the other, the lower sphere, the organs for the transformation of the first and second being foods. There are 3 apertures in the upper sphere, opening outwards. 2 serve for sight, and the 3rd for hearing. The other, the lower sphere, has only 2 apertures, one in front, for taking in the first and second being foods, and the other at the back for the elimination from the organism of residues. To the lower sphere are also attached 2 very strong sinewy feet, and on each of these is a growth that serves the purpose of fingers with us. There is still another planet, a quite small one, bearing the name Moon in that solar system, my dear boy. During its motion, this peculiar little planet often approached very near to our planet Mars, and sometimes during whole kilprenos, I took great pleasure in observing through my tescuano in my observatory the process of existence of the three-brained beings upon it. Though the beings of this planet have very frail planetary bodies, they have on the other hand a very strong spirit, owing to which they all possess an extraordinary perseverance and capacity for work. In exterior form, they resemble what are called large ants, and like these, they are always bustling about, working both on and within their planet. The results of their ceaseless activity are now already plainly visible. I once happened to notice that during 2 of our years, they tunneled, so to say, the whole of their planet. They were compelled to undertake this task on account of the abnormal local climactic conditions, which are due to the fact that this planet arose unexpectedly, and the regulation of its climactic harmony was therefore not prearranged by the higher powers. The climate of this planet is mad, and in its variability it could give points to the most highly strung hysterical women existing on another of the planets of that same solar system, of which I shall also tell you. Sometimes there are such frosts on this moon that everything is frozen through and through, and it becomes impossible for beings to breathe in the open atmosphere. And then suddenly it becomes so hot there that an egg can be cooked in its atmosphere in a jiffy. For only 2 short periods on that peculiar little planet, namely before and after its complete revolution about its neighbor, another planet nearby, the weather is so glorious that for several rotations the whole planet is in blossom, and yields the various products for their first being food greatly in excess of their general need during their existence in that peculiar intraplanetary kingdom, which they have arranged, and where they are protected from all the vagaries of this mad climate inharmoniously changing the state of the atmosphere. Nearest to that small planet is another, a larger planet, which also occasionally approaches quite close to the planet Mars and is called Earth. The said moon is just a part of this Earth, and the latter must now constantly maintain the moon's existence. On the just mentioned planet Earth, also, 3-brained beings are formed, and they also contain all the data for coding higher being bodies in themselves. But in strength of spirit, they do not begin to compare with the beings breeding on the little planet aforementioned. The external codings of the 3-brained beings of the planet Earth closely resemble our own. Only first of all, their skin is a little slimier than ours, And then, secondly, they have no tail, and their heads are without horns. What is worst about them is their feet, namely, they have no hooves. It is true that for protection against external influences, they have invented what they call boots, but this invention does not help them very much. Apart from the imperfection of their exterior form, their reason also is quite uniquely strange. Their being reason, owing to very many causes about which I may tell you some time, has gradually degenerated and at the present time is very, very strange and exceedingly peculiar. Beelzebub would have said more, but the captain of the ship entering at that moment, Beelzebub, after promising the boy to tell him about the beings of the planet Earth on another occasion, began to talk with the captain. Beelzebub asked the captain to tell him, first, who he was, how long he had been a captain, and how he liked his work, and afterwards to explain some of the details of the contemporary cosmic ships. Thereupon the captain said, "Your Right Reverence, I was destined by my father as soon as I reached the age of responsible being for this career in the service of our endless Creator. Starting with the lowest positions on the trans-space ships, I ultimately merited to perform the duties of captain, and it is now 8 years that I have been captain on the long-distance ships. This last post of mine, namely that of captain of the ship Karnak, I took, strictly speaking, in succession to my father, when, after his long years of blameless service to his endlessness in the performance of the duties of captain from almost the very beginning of the world creation, he had become worthy to be promoted to the post of ruler of the solar system Kalman. In short," continued the captain, "I began my service just when your Right Reverence was departing for the place of your exile. I was still only a sweeper on the long-distance ships of that period. Yes, a long, long time has passed by. Everything has undergone change, and is changed since then. Only our Lord and Sovereign remains unchanged. The blessings of Amenzano on his unchangeableness throughout eternity. You, your Right Reverence, have condescended to remark very justly that the former ships were very inconvenient and cumbersome. Yes, they were then. Indeed, very complicated and cumbersome. I too remember them very well. There is an enormous difference between the ships of that time and the ships now. In our youth, all such ships, both for intersystem and for interplanetary communication, were still run on the cosmic substance ilekilpomagtisje, which is a totality consisting of two separate parts of the omnipresent Okidanoch, and it was to obtain this totality that just those numerous materials were necessary which the former ships had to carry. But these ships did not remain in use long after you flew from these parts, having soon thereafter been replaced by the ships of the system of Saint Venoma.